Okay, here we go. This is session number 24, I believe. We're starting chapter 4. The title of the chapter is The Illusions of the Ego. All right, now we're at chapter 4. We're getting on. So Jesus is going to focus on beginning to talk about the ego specifically. All right? Because basically what this text does, it shines a light on what the ego thought system is all about. All right? So that we can notice, we can realize when we're identifying with that thought system and then choose again. All right, so this is the beginning of describing the ego. All right, and there's an introduction to this chapter. So let's begin with that, the introduction. It says, the Bible says that you should go with a brother twice as far as he asks. It certainly does not suggest that you set him back on his journey. Devotion to a brother cannot set you back either. It can lead only to mutual progress. The result of genuine devotion is inspiration, a word which properly understood is the opposite of fatigue. To be fatigued is to be dispirited, but to be inspired is to be in the spirit. To be egocentric is to be dispirited, but to be self-centered in the right sense is to be inspired or in the spirit. The truly inspired are enlightened and cannot abide in darkness. And you'll notice that when he says to be self-centered, the S in self is capitalized. So that's the reference to your higher self, who you truly are. All right? So, but to be self-centered in the right sense is to be inspired. Okay? You've taken the spirit in, so to speak. All right? So, there's always something to point out, and I'm quite sure I miss a lot of things, but when he talks about devotion to a brother in sentence 3, devotion to a brother cannot set you back either. All right? It can only lead to mutual progress. All right? This just reminds me that when you read through the course, and if you happen to become a student of the course and you reread it, and you get deeper and deeper into it, and you notice that certain lines jump out at you, and you could dwell on them and get the full impact of what the course is trying to say. All right, we'll see a lot of these sentences along the way, as we already have. But he's talking about mutual progress. All right? No matter what it looks like, all right? You say, well, the other guy is acting out, that person is acting out. If I am right-minded, right? If I'm self-centered in the right way, as he says, right? If I'm asking to see the acting out, if I'm asking to see that correctly, right, I'm not projecting onto it, that's the process of forgiveness. And there is actually mutual benefit, right? We both benefit from that, even though it might not look like there's any benefit, right? And that's because the form truly doesn't matter. It's the content, and it's the minds the seeming separate minds, which they're not, the mind is one. Minds are joined. So if I'm accepting the innocence, right, if I'm allowing that into my awareness, it's in your awareness also, although you might have, a bigger wall than me or whatever. You might be more afraid of the innocence, all right? That's why Jesus is like a brother who is devoted to us, right? And, he's like a step ahead, right? He's done things already, and he's just waiting for us to catch on. But he's there to help us along, okay? So let's just look at paragraph 2. He says, you could speak from the spirit or from the ego, as you choose. If you speak from spirit, you have chosen, in quotes, be still and know that I am God. These words are inspired because they reflect knowledge. If you speak from the ego, you are disclaiming knowledge instead of affirming it, and are thus dispiriting yourself. Do not embark on useless journeys, because they are indeed in vain. The ego may desire them, but spirit cannot embark on them, because it is forever unwilling to depart from its foundation. Right? Spirit has its foundation in truth, in reality, in knowledge. And spirit really doesn't want to waste time, doesn't want to even embark on useless journeys. Right? And the ego is always involved in a useless journey. It's doing something that's just ultimately meaningless. But what happens is it's an attempt to keep itself alive, so to speak, to keep itself viable, right? By distracting us, keeping us mindless. Right? Once we realize, oh, I have a mind, I can go back there and plug into the source, plug into the memory of who I truly am. Right? And then I see the world differently. Right? I see the world differently, and I am able to bring that, so to speak, to bring that everywhere, to everyone. All right. He says, and you could speak from the spirit or the ego as you choose. It just reminds me of one time Dr. Wapnick was speaking, and somebody asked him about channeling, right? Because he says, okay, so channeling, so this, you could say this book was channeled, okay? He says, but if you think about it, he said, you're sitting at the dinner table. He said, when you say pass the salt, you're channeling, okay? And so you could just think about that. It's just a matter of what thought system am I grounded with? What thought system have I, aligned myself with? Have I aligned myself with the right mind, so to speak, with the thought system of Jesus, the Holy Spirit, right? The memory of who I am, right? Am I coming forward with that as my foundation? So he says, it doesn't matter. So whenever you say something or do something, you're channeling, so to speak, ego or Holy Spirit, ego or right mind. Okay? Somewhere in the book, all right, Jesus says there are no neutral thoughts. All right? You're channeling, so to speak, one way or the other. And this is what he means. You can speak from the spirit or from the ego, as you choose. All right? And this is a wonderful sentence He says, if you speak from the Spirit, you have chosen to, and in quotes, be still and know that I am God. And that's such a profound statement, right? Just be still and know that I am God, that God is. All right? And way in the beginning of the book, Jesus told Helen that, look, all we really would have to say is, God is, and then cease to speak. But in our condition, we need more. We need more words, okay? Then he says, if you speak from the ego, you are disclaiming knowledge instead of affirming it, and are thus dispiriting yourself. All right? You're dispirited. You're fatigued. Okay? So he says, look, do not embark on useless journeys, because they are indeed in vain. The ego may desire them, and the ego, you'll see as we go on and on, the ego desires these useless journeys as a means of distraction, as a means to keep us mindless, to keep us unaware that there is a mind, it's split, and I have a choice. I could choose ego or right-mindedness. Okay. So the ego may desire them, but the spirit cannot embark on them because it's forever unwilling to depart from its foundation. Spirit doesn't want to leave after a while, and that's why practicing, as we say in our condition, and there's a mind training that goes on with the course. It's 365 lessons, so that each day we set aside a period of time to think of something that's been written out for the day. All right? That's training the mind to stop, to pull back from the ego for a brief period of time and dwell on the reflection of truth. All right? To dwell on the reflection of truth. All right? So we get in the habit of going to the right mind, and that reinforces it. It's like, it's like going to the gym, working out your biceps. All right? Your bicep gets bigger, and that's what happens when you keep going to the right mind. Right? This is the way it seems in our condition. That we just reinforce the right-minded thought system, and after a while, we prefer to be there. We prefer to be there, and when we slip away, right, when we go into the detour into fear, as it were, right, we feel it, and we feel that disruption, and after a while, it's just, oh my God, I want to get back to that peace, right, that stillness, that stately calm within, right, but the ego is always threatened by that. Right? Ego doesn't know about spirit, it just knows that something is threatening its existence. It's weakening it. So it kicks up. It goes, oh yeah? Watch this. All right then. Let's just go on. Paragraph 3. The journey to the cross should be the last useless journey. Do not dwell upon it, but dismiss it as accomplished. If you can accept it as your own last useless journey, you are also free to join my resurrection. Until you do so, your life is indeed wasted. It merely reenacts the separation, the loss of power, the futile attempts of the ego at reparation, and finally, the crucifixion of the body, or death. Such repetitions are endless until they are voluntarily given up. Do not make the pathetic error of clinging to that old rugged cross. The only message of the crucifixion is that you can overcome the cross. Until then, you are free to crucify yourself as often as you choose. This is not the gospel I intended to offer you. We have another journey to undertake, and if you will read these lessons carefully, they will help prepare you to undertake it. They will prepare you to undertake it. All right? If you read these lessons carefully. And if you remember how the course began with the inner dictation, so to speak, to Helen, Helen was hearing, an inner dictation, as she describes it. And at one point, this voice said, "This is a Course in Miracles. Please take notes." All right? And then along the way, because Helen was a cantankerous person, as the story goes, Jesus would remind her in different ways. He said, you have to study these notes. All right? You have to actually read what you've been writing down. Okay? And by advising Helen this way, he's advising us. All right? If you read these lessons carefully, they will help prepare you to undertake another journey. Right? We have another journey to undertake, not the one to the cross. He said, consider that done. You don't have to do it. You don't have to suffer. You don't have to crucify yourself. All right? He says, I did that to show you that death can be overcome, that death is not the end. All right? So, he said, don't dwell upon it. Dismiss it as accomplished. All right? The only message of the crucifixion is that you can overcome the cross. All right? So he tells us to give up that useless journey. And here's the group of sentences that stuck out as I was reading it just now. So until you give up the useless journey, your life is wasted. All right? And this is what the ego does. Okay? It merely reenacts the separation, the loss of power, the futile attempts of the ego at reparation, and finally the crucifixion of the body or death. All right? And such repetitions are endless until they are voluntarily given up. All right? And we begin the process of giving them up by inviting what we call the invitation to the Holy Spirit. When after a while, and you have to see for yourself really that after a while, life here it gets hard. That's putting it mildly. And sometimes it seems meaningless. All right? And we get to that point, what am I doing? What's it all about? And all that. We start suffering emotionally, besides physically. As your body ages, you start to realize certain things. Whoa, where'd that come from? All right? And then, some people, doesn't matter what their age is, they get to a point where they say, what is this? What's this all about? It's ridiculous. And then, as Jesus will say later on, that, he will say, men have died on seeing this. Okay? But they could have learned their biggest lesson. All right? And basically the biggest lesson is that there is another way. There is something else besides what our senses report to us. All right? There is something else, and that is your existence as spirit. All right? And You can contact it. You can immerse yourself in it. All right? And you will see this nutty world quite differently. Quite differently. All right? All righty then. So that's the introduction. All right? Until that, and we repeat the separation, the loneliness, all that stuff that comes along with the original belief that I separated from God. The ego keeps separating. All right? I mean, you could see it in the birth of a child. What has happened? Two cells have joined together, and then they start separating. Separating. All right. That's just one example. I mean, really. You can notice separation in a lot of things if you're looking for it. Okay? So, let's go to page 53, section number 1. Okay? This is a longer section. We'll see if we get through it in one class. Okay. Section 1 is called Right Teaching and Right Learning. A good teacher clarifies his own ideas and strengthens them by teaching them. Teacher and pupil are alike in the learning process. They are in the same order of learning, and unless they share their lessons, convictions will be lacking. So unless they share their lessons, the conviction will be lacking. A good teacher must believe in the ideas he teaches, but he must meet another condition. He must believe in the students to whom he offers the ideas. Okay? And this is what Jesus is telling us about himself. He believes in us. He says, I know you have the capacity to take this information and digest it and use it correctly. All right? So teacher and pupil are alike in the learning process. They're in the same order of learning, and unless they share their lessons, conviction will be lacking. All right? A good teacher must believe in the ideas he teaches. All right? But he must believe in the students to whom he offers the ideas. Paragraph 2, many stand guard over their ideas because they want to protect their thought systems as they are. And learning means change. Change is always fearful to the separated, okay? Because they cannot conceive of it as a move toward healing the separation. They always perceive it as a move toward further separation, because the separation was the first experience of change. You believe that if you allow no change to enter into your ego, you will find peace. All right? This profound confusion is possible only if you maintain that the same thought system can stand on two foundations. Right? Nothing can reach spirit from the ego, and nothing can reach the ego from spirit. Spirit can neither strengthen the ego nor reduce the conflict within it. The ego is a contradiction. Yourself, with a small s, and God's self are in opposition. So this ego self and God's self are in opposition. They are opposed in source, in direction, and in outcome. They are fundamentally irreconcilable because spirit cannot perceive and the ego cannot know. They are therefore not in communication and can never be in communication. Nevertheless, the ego can learn, even though its maker can be misguided. He cannot, however, make the totally lifeless out of the life given. Okay? So let's just take that last sentence. So the maker of the ego, which is that part of the mind that decides. Jesus never talks about decision maker per se. All right? But there's always implied that there's a part of the mind that decides. Right? And in the Course, when Jesus is using the pronoun you, that's basically who he's talking to. It's that part of the mind that decides. Okay? So, he's saying, but that decision maker, even if he or she decides to align itself with the ego, which is the thought of separating from the oneness, right? You can't make the lifeless out of the life-giving. So no matter how hard we try and pretend that this cosmos is full of life, right? It's an illusion. He says you can't make life out of the lifeless, right? You cannot make the totally lifeless out of the life-given. So in spirit, in our true reality, we've been given life, so to speak. Right? He says you can only make believe you're doing that in the ego thought system. And isn't it convincing? We have convinced ourselves that we have done it and we are surrounded by life. Okay? And he says, many stand guard over their ideas. Right? And this is what happens. We stand guard over our ideas because the thought of change is threatening. Right? I mean, we could look at it even in our own lives. There's instances when we've had to change, or we're told that change is coming, you know, and it's very threatening. We just want to keep things the way they are. You know, don't do that. The devil you know is better than the devil you don't know. You know? Somebody says, oh, there's a new boss coming. Oh my God. You know? We're changing this, we're changing that at work. Oh my God. Right? We have to move from one house to another. Oh my goodness. Right? Change, any kind of change, it's disruptive to the ego. Right? Change is always fearful to the separated, because they cannot conceive of it as a move toward healing the separation. Right? So, you know, at one point in the book, Jesus will say, all are called. Everyone is called to come home, to heal that split mind. But few choose to listen. All right? Because of fear, the fear of change. You know, change, oh my goodness. Because it reminds us of the original change. On a very deep level, of course we're not aware of the original change, all right? But on a very deep level, we're reminded that we once were part of the oneness, and we still are, but we don't realize it. But that change, when I decided to believe I could be separated, was a tumultuous change, just tumultuous. You know, I had everything and I turned my back on it. You know, I had safety, I turned my back on it. I felt love and caring and knowledge. Now I don't know what's going on. Right? And I have this fear that something's coming to get me. Right? That's all the product of the original change that we're really not aware of. And there's Dr. Wapnick would always say there's really, you don't have to get in touch with that. You just look at the choices you make during the day, right? Because he says the ego just repeats the separation. And many of us stand guard over the ego thought system. Oh, no. Because change is always fearful to the separated. All right? They always perceive it as a move toward further change because the separation was their first experience of change. You believe that if you allow no change to enter into your ego, you will find peace. Okay, don't change. Don't ever change. All right? He says, you think you will find peace. He says, this profound confusion is possible only if you maintain that the same thought system can stand on two foundations. All right? By that, I'm hearing that only if you think that the ego thought system can stand with one foot in the peaceful box and one foot in the conflict and chaos box. So, or maybe you could picture your one foot in this rowboat and one foot in that rowboat. Eventually, whoa, you can't maintain stability. All right? It says spirit can neither strengthen the ego nor reduce the conflict within it. All right? Ken would always say these are 100% systems. You're either in the ego 100% or right-minded. Now, our experience is that we fluctuate. So be that as it may. Just notice when you feel you've drifted back into the concepts of sin, guilt, and fear. All right? That concept of guilt, something's coming to get you. You did something wrong. Right? Look out, kid, it's something you did. All right? God knows when, but you're doing it again. All right? Love Bob Dylan, right? But notice when you're in that thought system. Right? And then rejoice that there is another thought system that can change that perception. All right? And it seems like we fluctuate. All right? But he says the spirit can't come in and change anything in the ego because in spirit, the ego doesn't exist. What are you going to change? There's nothing there. That's why Jesus says, I came here, but we're going to start where you believe you are. We're going to work from the bottom up. All right? I can't just flick a switch in your head. All right? That would denigrate the power of your mind. All right? And what's coming up for me right now is that one time Helen, she's taking down the course, she's telling Jesus about this terrible anxiety she's feeling. And she asks him, take it away. Help me with this fear. Just take this fear away from me. And he tells her, of course, and Jesus is always very gentle. Always. Right? He says, look, don't ask me, the right request is don't ask me to take your fear away. Right? He says, because I don't believe in fear. How can I take away something I don't believe in? He says, ask me rather to help you with the conditions that led to the fear. Right? And that condition is always the result of believing that you separated from your source. You separated from the oneness. You separated from God, from heaven, from reality, from knowledge. Right? The belief that we separated from that is the cause of the fear, no matter what the specifics are. Right? So we reach out and we ask our brother Jesus to come and help us to see correctly. Correct my perception. Right? And if I'm in that space where my perception is corrected, the fear is quelled. Right? The fear is mitigated. Because in that space, the fear doesn't exist. All right? So we practice with that. I mean, in my own experience, at one time or another, well, I'll give you the time when I was actually studying the course. There was something that was very fearful going on in my life, very. And I would go to Jesus and ask him, help me to see correctly, help me to see correctly. And I feel good. 4 or 5 seconds. And bam, it seemed like I go right back into the fear, right back into the fear. All right? But the idea is to notice when you go back and then try to pull yourself back into right mind and ask, help me to see this correctly, please. Help me to see it correctly. All right? And perception will change. All right. So, it says the ego is a contradiction. Yourself and God's self are in opposition. All right. So the ego created self. Right. That illusion of who I am is in opposition to God. All right. So, they are fundamentally irreconcilable because spirit cannot perceive and the ego cannot know. Right? They are therefore not in communication and can never be in communication. Right? But he says, nevertheless, the ego can learn, even though its maker can be misguided. Okay? And he's talking about that decision-making part of the mind. The decision maker can learn, right? Can learn which part of the mind to go to, right? Even though its maker can be misguided, right? But the decision maker, no matter how hard I try, I cannot make the totally lifeless out of the life given. And he's going to tell us everything here is lifeless, right? There's a line in the Course that says there is no life outside of heaven. And he's consistent with that thought, with that theme, so to speak, all right? And he says, so you can't make the lifeless out of the life given, which is who you are. You are life itself. In spirit, all right? You can't make up these little puppets, all right? Even though they're very convincing, all right? So we start where we are and say, help me to see these puppets correctly, please, all right? Okay, moving on. Paragraph 3. Spirit need not be taught, but the ego must be. Learning is ultimately perceived as frightening because it leads to the relinquishment, not the destruction, of the ego to the light of spirit. Right? And I think that's a big, major distinction, is that ego, the learning part of the mind, right? It learns. The decision maker learns, oh, I don't want to go there. I don't want to go there anymore. All right? But the ego is not, it's not destroyed, because if I'm destroying it, that means I'm making it real. What I'm doing is I'm just relinquishing it. I'm walking away from it. All right? Here's one of those times when Jesus uses that, one of my favorite words. Because it leads to the relinquishment, not the destruction of the ego, to the light of spirit. All right? We just look at it and say, I don't want that anymore. rather be in the comfort and serenity and tranquility of spirit. Who needs the chaos? Right? So this is the change the ego must fear, the relinquishment, walking away from it. All right? The light dispels the ego. All right? So this is the change the ego must fear because it does not share my charity. I believe when Jesus is talking about his charity, he's talking about seeing right past the ego, right? Seeing right past the ego in me, right? To who I really am, right? That's his charity. And then he says, on a very personal note, my lesson was like yours, right? And because I learned it, I can teach it. So my lesson was like yours. For that one brief moment, I was faced with the separation, the choice for separation or for oneness. Right? And he chose the oneness. Right? And he says, because I learned that lesson, that I am not guilty, that I am still as God created me, I am still very innocent, and I'm lacking nothing. He says, because I learned it, I can teach it. Right? And he says, I will never attack your ego, but I am trying to teach you how its thought system arose. Right? When I remind you of your true creation, your ego cannot but respond with fear. All right? So as we go through this book, and Jesus continually reminds us of our true creation, that ego thought system is going, what? Right? It's like, the image that comes up for me is that it's like the ego is this prehistoric person, and he is rumbling in the offing. All right, there's rumbling somewhere. There's streaks of light and loud cracks coming from the sky. What is that? All right, it feels threatened. All right, so as we're presented with the truth, as the truth is entering our awareness, right, that ego thought system is threatened. It doesn't know what's threatening it, doesn't have an idea of what thunder or lightning is, right, because it's prehistoric. And it just gets afraid. All right? When I remind you of your true creation, the ego cannot but respond with fear. All right? And it will try to reestablish itself. All right? It will try to reinforce itself. You know, it's similar to what I believe, what Eckhart Tolle speaks about as the pain body. And that pain body wants to be fed, it wants to be nourished, it wants to grow. Right? Same thing with the ego. And it feels like it's being deprived. Right? And it is. If we're learning about our true self, that ego is going to feel very threatened. Okay? Right? And he says, I'll never attack your ego. Right? And why won't he do that? Because he doesn't believe in it. Right? What am I going to do? Shadow boxing here. I don't believe in your ego. Why should I attack it? And besides, you believe in it. You miscreated it. So all I can do is point out the fact that you miscreated this. And your mind is very powerful. Right? Your mind is very powerful. All you need to do is find a spot where you can look up into the nighttime sky, right? Or find a spot where you can look down on the wonders of the earth, so to speak, all right? Or crowds of people, right? You get a high spot in Manhattan and look down on all the people. You say, oh my goodness. Oh my. All right. So Jesus says, I'm not going to attack that because you miscreated that. All right. I'm not going to make it real, but I'm going to point out to you that your mind is powerful and you could choose something else. All right. I'm going to show you the downright meaninglessness of it all. Right? Some of it can be useful for a while, but basically, why would you want anything else except knowledge? Knowledge of who you are and who your maker is. And the ego becomes afraid of that. So, paragraph 4. Teaching and learning are your greatest strengths now, because they enable you to change your mind and help others to change theirs. There's always that mutual thing. He says the ark of forgiveness is entered 2 by 2. Right? We don't go to the realm of knowledge without the other. Right? We can't leave anyone out. Right? It's not love if it doesn't include everyone. And as Ken would say, look, you can't have everyone over for Thanksgiving dinner, okay? Right? You can't be in relationship with everyone, all right? So we're not talking about that specific type of interaction. We're talking about the awareness of who you are and the expansion of that awareness. It includes everyone. And if it doesn't, then, you know, the beeper sounds and you're out also. So, teaching and learning are your greatest strengths now because they enable you to change your mind and help others to change theirs. Refusing to change your mind will not prove that the separation has not occurred. Right? The dreamer who doubts the reality of his dream while he is still dreaming is not really healing. Right? Not really healing his split mind. You dream of a separated ego and believe in a world that rests upon it. This is very real to you. You cannot undo it by not changing your mind about it. If you are willing to renounce the role of guardian of your thought system and open it to me, I will correct it very gently and lead you back to God. All right. That's such a wonderfully kind and gentle way. He's trying to help us develop a trust in him. Right? He goes, look, I know this whole thing is very, very real to you. Excuse me. I know it's very real to you. All right? And he says, and you cannot undo it by just leaving everything as status quo. Okay? There has to be some impetus on my part. All right? I have to eventually say that there has to be a better way. There must be something else besides this. Right? This can't be it. Right? So this is very real to you. You cannot undo it by not changing your mind about it. If you are willing to renounce the role of guardian of your thought system and open it to me, I will correct it very gently and lead you back to God. Well, isn't that a relief? All right? He's just saying, look, just give up protecting this thought system, this incorrect, nutty thought system of separation, sin, guilt, fear. You did something wrong, right? You're going to have to pay for it. Sin, guilt always demands punishment of someone. All right? So he says, look, you just ask me to help you. I'll help you to see it differently. Don't guard this thought system so righteously, because it only becomes more and more painful, really. Okay. And he says, and if you're willing to renounce the role of guardian, open it up to me. And by that he means just ask me. Help me to see this correctly, please. All right. This is what my ego thought system is presenting to me. Can you help me reinterpret it? Help me see, what does love look like in this situation? How does love get reflected in this kind of situation? In this relationship, in this job? All right? How do I see through that filter? All right? And he says, okay, open it to me, and I will correct it very gently. All right? And lead you back to God. All right? And it's a very gentle and powerful promise. All right? Help him reinterpret our ego thought system. All right? So I'm going to end it here, and we're halfway through this first section. And I'm going to go right on to session number 25, and we'll finish this session. Okay? So, because it's already like 51, 52 minutes, and my attention span is probably shorter than yours. So, we don't need to go on for an hour and a half. All righty then. Love you. See you in a little while.